You're standing in a forest 40 million years before the first human ever walked upright. You're not even human yet. You're small, quick, and hungry. And on the ground in front of you is a piece of fruit that's gone soft, brown, and strange smelling. Your instincts scream two different things at once. Eat it, or run. That smell is ethanol. And the moment your ancestors decided not to run, that single choice, is the reason billions of humans today can't get through a Friday night without a drink in their hand. This isn't a story about beer. It's not a story about wine, or parties, or hangovers. This is a story about a chemical accident that happened in the guts of rotting fruit millions of years before anyone built a fire, and how that accident rewired the human brain so deeply that we're still living inside its consequences right now, today in your own bloodstream. Here's the part nobody tells you. Getting drunk isn't a human invention. It's older than humans. It's older than apes. It might be older than most of the mammals alive on Earth right now. Picture the forest floor about 80 million years ago. Fruit falls. It sits in the heat. Wild yeast, invisible everywhere, ancient, starts eating the sugar inside that fruit and turning it into alcohol as a waste product. This is fermentation. It's not a human discovery. It's just what happens when sugar, yeast, and time collide. And here's the twist that changes everything. For a small primate living in the trees, that smell of alcohol wasn't disgusting. It was information. It meant ripe. It meant calories are here. It meant eat this now before something else does. Scientists call this the drunken monkey hypothesis. And it sounds like a joke until you look at the data behind it. Researchers studying the genetics of primates found something that should stop you in your tracks. Around 10 million years ago, a single genetic mutation appeared in the ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas. This mutation made an enzyme called ADH 40 times more efficient at breaking down alcohol. 40 times. Not a small tweak. A massive leap, and it happened right around the time our ancestors came down out of the trees and started eating fruit off the forest floor instead of picking it fresh from branches. But here's what scientists actually found when they dug deeper. The fruit on the ground ferments faster than fruit on the tree. It's already interacting with yeast, already breaking down, already producing alcohol. So the primates who could process that alcohol without getting sick had an advantage. They could eat food their rivals couldn't touch. Sit with that for a second. The ability to handle alcohol wasn't a flaw evolution let slip through. It was a survival tool. It helped your ancestors find food other animals couldn't safely eat. This is where it gets uncomfortable because that mutation is still inside you right now. Every time alcohol makes you feel warm, relaxed, looser than usual, that's a 10-million-year-old survival mechanism firing in your brain, one built for a world of rotting mangoes, not martini glasses. And that mechanism didn't disappear when your ancestors became human. It got dragged along for the ride, sitting quietly in your DNA, waiting. Now fast forward. Skip past the apes. Skip past the first hominids. Land somewhere in Africa, roughly 200,000 years ago, where the first anatomically modern humans are walking the earth, foraging, following herds, surviving day to day with nothing but stone tools and raw nerve. You're one of them. You're gathering fruit in a basket made of woven bark. Some of what you collect will get eaten today. Some will sit for a few days before anyone touches it. And in that gap, those few days sitting in a warm hut or a hollowed-out gourd, something starts happening to the fruit that nobody asked for and nobody controls. It ferments, on its own, without anyone trying to make it happen. This is the part that upends what most people assume about ancient humans and alcohol. We tend to picture cavemen discovering beer like a light bulb moment. Some genius early human accidentally inventing booze in a flash of insight. That's not what happened. Alcohol invented itself over and over, by accident, everywhere humans stored food. Which means the real question was never, when did humans discover alcohol? The real question is, how did humans keep running into alcohol without meaning to, for hundreds of thousands of years, before they figured out how to control it? And that reframes the entire story. Because if fermentation happens automatically wherever fruit, grain, or honey sits around too long, then your ancient ancestors weren't choosing to drink. They were constantly, unavoidably exposed to alcohol as a side effect of simply storing food to survive. Here's the disturbing part. This means getting a little drunk might be one of the oldest, most repeated human experiences in existence. Older than language, older than fire control, older than clothing. Let that sink in. Before humans could speak in full sentences, they may have already known what it felt like to be intoxicated. Now picture a specific night. You're in a small group, maybe 20 or 30 people, somewhere in what's now Ethiopia or Kenya, roughly 100,000 years ago. The group has stored wild honey in a hollow log for days. Rain got in. Wild yeast got in. And when someone finally opens that log, the smell hits differently than fresh honey ever does. Sharp, sour, almost dangerous, but underneath it, sweet and inviting. Do you eat it? Your body has two conflicting signals firing at once. One says spoiled, don't touch it. The other, quieter, older, says calories, sugar, energy. Take it. This exact moment, this specific fork in the road, happened uncountable times across tens of thousands of years, in different forms, in different climates, with different fruits and grains. And each time, the humans who could tolerate a bit of alcohol without getting violently sick had an edge over the ones who couldn't. But here's what scientists actually found when they studied this pattern across cultures. The ability to break down alcohol efficiently isn't evenly distributed across humanity today. Some populations have genetic variants that make alcohol hit them far harder, far faster, a reaction some people call an Asian flush, tied to a specific enzyme. Mutation. Why would some human populations lose the alcohol tolerance that others kept? That's not a small detail. That's a clue buried in your own DNA about how differently ancient groups related to fermented food, depending on their environment, their diet, and how often alcohol crossed their path. This connects to something happening in your body right now, whether you drink or not. The genes controlling how you metabolize alcohol are directly inherited from ancestors who were exposed to fermenting fruit, honey, or grain thousands of generations ago. Your relationship with alcohol today, whether one drink hits you hard or barely touches you, was partly decided before you were even born, by choices your ancestors never consciously made. Now let's jump forward again, because the story doesn't stay accidental forever. At some point, ancient humans stopped just stumbling into fermentation. They started making it happen on purpose. And that shift might be one of the most underrated turning points in human history. The oldest confirmed evidence of intentional alcohol production comes from a cave in China, dated to roughly 9,000 years ago. Researchers analyzing pottery residue found traces of a fermented drink made from rice, honey, and fruit. Not beer as we know it, not wine as we know it, but something in between, deliberately brewed. 9,000 years. Before writing existed. Before the wheel. Before most of the crops we eat today had even been domesticated. Humans were already brewing alcohol on purpose. But here's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. Some researchers argue the evidence goes back even further and stretches into territory that challenges one of the biggest assumptions we make about the birth of civilization itself. There's a theory, controversial, debated, but taken seriously by real archaeologists, that alcohol may have been one of the reasons humans started farming in the first place. Think about what that means. We're taught that agriculture began because humans wanted bread, reliable food, stability. But some scientists point to Göbekli Tepe, a massive stone temple complex in modern-day Turkey, built roughly 11,000 years ago, before agriculture, before permanent villages, before anything we'd call a city. At Gobekli Tepe, archaeologists found huge stone vats capable of holding hundreds of liters of liquid. Residue analysis suggests they were used for brewing something alcoholic, likely from wild grains, to fuel massive communal gatherings. Here's the question that should stop you cold. What if humans didn't domesticate wheat to make bread first? What if they domesticated it to make beer? This is sometimes called the beer before bread hypothesis. And while it's still debated among archaeologists, the timeline is genuinely eerie. The vats at Gobekli Tepe predate confirmed evidence of bread-making by a significant stretch. People were gathering in the thousands, building monumental architecture, and possibly getting collectively intoxicated, before farming as we understand it had even begun. If that theory holds even partially true, it means alcohol isn't just a side effect of civilization. It might be one of the reasons civilization exists at all. Sit with that for a second because it flips the entire narrative. We like to imagine our ancestors as grim, practical survivalists who only farmed because they needed food to live. But what if the desire to gather, celebrate, and share an altered state of consciousness was just as powerful a motivator as hunger? That idea connects directly to modern psychology, and this is where things start to feel uncomfortably familiar. Studies on modern social drinking show that alcohol doesn't just relax individuals. It changes group behavior. It lowers social barriers, increases bonding hormones like oxytocin, and makes strangers feel like friends faster than almost anything else humans do together. If that effect existed 10,000 years ago the same way it exists at a wedding reception today, then alcohol may have functioned as a kind of social glue. A tool that let early humans build trust with strangers, form larger groups, and cooperate at a scale that pure survival instinct never could have produced on its own. That's not a small idea. That's potentially one of the hidden engines behind the rise of complex human society. But here's what scientists actually found that complicates this beautiful theory. Alcohol didn't just build bonds. It also built the first documented cases of addiction, violence, and social collapse tied to a substance. And the evidence for that goes back much further than most people assume. This is the part of the story most documentaries skip, because it's uncomfortable. It doesn't fit the cheerful ancient beer party narrative. But it's there, buried in the archaeological record, waiting. Let's go back to that cave in China for a second, the one with the 9,000-year-old fermented residue. Picture the scene. You're inside the cave. Firelight flickers against damp stone walls. A clay vessel sits near the fire, filled with a cloudy, slightly fizzing liquid that smells sharp, sweet, and strange. Someone drinks first. Everyone watches. Their face changes. Their shoulders drop. They start laughing at something that wasn't funny 5 minutes ago. And within an hour, the entire group is louder, looser, less guarded than you've ever seen them. Ask yourself, what does that do to a group of humans who survive by staying alert to predators, threats, and rivals at all times? What happens when an entire tribe simultaneously lowers its guard on purpose? This is where the story shifts from curious to genuinely dangerous, because early humans experimenting with intentional fermentation weren't just discovering pleasure. They were discovering vulnerability. Here's a hook most people never think about. Getting a group of ancient humans drunk at the same time wasn't just a party. It was a tactical risk. If your group was intoxicated and a rival tribe, a predator, or bad weather struck at that exact moment, there was no fast, sober response team standing by. Which raises an unsettling question. Why would ancient humans take that risk at all? Why deliberately impair the very alertness that kept them alive? The answer scientists keep circling back to is ritual. Not casual drinking, but structured, controlled, often sacred use of alcohol tied to specific events, harvests, funerals, initiations, and religious ceremonies. Archaeological evidence from multiple ancient cultures, including early sites in the Middle East and China, shows alcohol consistently appearing in burial contexts. Vessels found in graves, residue on ceremonial cups, traces in tombs meant for the dead. Alcohol wasn't just a party favor. It was treated as something powerful enough to accompany people into the afterlife. Why would you bury alcohol with the dead? Ask that question honestly, and the answer gets unsettling fast. If alcohol was seen as a bridge to another state of consciousness while alive, ancient humans may have believed it could serve the same purpose after death. A substance capable of crossing boundaries the living couldn't otherwise cross. That single idea that altered consciousness equals contact with something beyond ordinary life shows up again and again across ancient cultures, completely independent of each other, on different continents, thousands of years apart. This is where the pattern gets almost too consistent to be coincidence. Fermented drinks appear in early religious ritual in Mesopotamia. They appear in early Chinese ceremonial bronze vessels made specifically for ritual wine. They appear in ancient Andean chicha ceremonies tied to worship. Different peoples, different continents, zero contact with each other, and yet alcohol keeps showing up in the exact same role. A substance believed to open a door to something sacred. Ask yourself why that pattern would repeat itself so precisely across cultures that never met, unless there was something fundamentally human about the experience alcohol creates. Something that felt to ancient minds like more than just a chemical buzz. But here's what scientists actually found when they studied the neuroscience behind this. alcohol doesn't just relax you. In the right dose, at the right social setting, it can trigger something close to a mild dissociative state, a loosening of the usual filters your brain uses to separate self from surroundings. To a modern person, that's just being tipsy. To an ancient human with no concept of neurotransmitters, no understanding of dopamine or GABA receptors, that experience might have felt like genuine contact with another world. This connects directly to something happening in modern psychology too. Researchers studying near-universal human attraction to altered states, whether from alcohol, fasting, rhythmic drumming, or other methods, have found that humans appear wired to seek out these experiences regardless of culture, geography, or era. It's not a modern weakness. It's an ancient, built-in drive, which means the urge you might feel to have just one drink to take the edge off after a stressful day connects to the exact same neurological wiring that pushed ancient humans toward ritual intoxication around a fire 50,000 years ago. You are not so different from them. That's the uncomfortable truth hiding underneath all this archaeology. Now here's a pattern interrupt, because the story is about to get darker, and you need to brace for it. Everything up to this point has painted alcohol as almost beneficial, a social glue, a ritual tool, an accidental gift from evolution. But here's what scientists actually found when they looked closer at ancient remains. Evidence of alcohol-related harm goes back nearly as far as evidence of alcohol-related ritual. Skeletal analysis from certain ancient sites shows signs consistent with chronic alcohol exposure, bone density issues, dental damage patterns linked to sugar-heavy fermented drinks, and in some remains, signs of liver stress that researchers associate with long-term heavy consumption. This means some ancient humans weren't just having a ceremonial sip during a harvest festival. Some of them were drinking heavily, repeatedly, over long periods of their lives. And once you accept that, a much darker question follows naturally. Did ancient humans experience addiction the same way we do? The honest answer, according to researchers studying the neurobiology of addiction, is more disturbing than comforting. Addiction isn't a modern invention created by liquor stores and vending machines. It's rooted in ancient brain structures, the same dopamine reward pathways that existed in early humans, and even in the primates before them. This means the biological machinery capable of addiction was already sitting inside the human brain long before humans ever brewed their first intentional drink. Alcohol didn't create addiction. It simply gave an ancient vulnerability something new to attach itself to. Here's a moment that should make you question your own instincts. If you've ever poured a second drink without quite deciding to, or reached for a snack out of habit rather than hunger, you've felt a small echo of the exact same reward circuitry that made rotting fruit irresistible to your ancestors millions of years ago. That pull isn't weakness. It's ancient wiring doing exactly what it evolved to do, except now it's operating in a world flooded with far more alcohol, far more sugar, and far more availability than it ever evolved to handle. Which raises an uncomfortable modern parallel. Ancient humans encountered alcohol occasionally, seasonally, tied to specific fruits ripening or specific rituals happening. Modern humans can access alcohol every single day, at any hour, in nearly unlimited quantities. The ancient wiring didn't change. The environment around it exploded. That mismatch, ancient brain, modern environment, is a phrase researchers use again and again when explaining why addiction, overeating, and other modern struggles feel so relentless. Your brain is still calibrated for a world of scarcity. It has no built-in defense against constant abundance. Now here's the mid-script reset, because what you're about to hear next isn't the kind of thing that makes it into most beer history documentaries. This part was buried, debated, and in some cases deliberately left out of popular retellings because it complicates the fun, celebratory version of the story people prefer to tell. There's growing evidence that in certain ancient societies, alcohol wasn't just a ritual tool or an accidental social glue. It was also, in some contexts, a tool of control. Researchers studying early state formation, the process by which small tribal groups became larger, hierarchical societies with rulers and workers, have found that alcohol played a documented role in labor systems in some ancient cultures. In parts of ancient Mesopotamia and early China, beer and beer-adjacent drinks were used as a form of payment to workers, particularly those involved in massive construction projects. At first glance, that sounds harmless, ancient people getting paid in beer instead of coins. But look closer, and a colder pattern starts to emerge. If beer is your payment and beer is mildly intoxicating, and beer is controlled by whoever holds power over the grain supply, you've just created a system where the ruling class controls not just your labor, but your access to a substance your brain is biologically wired to crave. That's not a party. That's leverage. Ask yourself this uncomfortable question. If the people building some of the earliest monumental structures on Earth were partly paid in a mildly addictive substance controlled entirely by those in power, how much of that labor was truly voluntary? This isn't confirmed as universal ancient practice. Historians debate the scale and intent behind it, but the pattern shows up often enough that researchers take it seriously as one of the darker undercurrents of early civilization. Alcohol wasn't just something ancient humans enjoyed together. In some contexts, it may have been one of the earliest tools used to keep large groups of people compliant, dependent, and easier to manage. Here's where the modern parallel becomes almost too obvious to ignore. Think about how many modern workplaces still use alcohol as a social reward. After-work drinks, celebratory toasts, open bars at company events. The specific pattern of using mild intoxication as both a bonding tool and a subtle mechanism of workplace culture didn't appear in the 20th century. It has roots stretching back thousands of years, into the earliest hierarchical societies humans ever built. You've been living inside an ancient pattern without realizing it. Every time a work happy hour felt slightly less optional than it was supposed to be. Now here's a pattern interrupt worth pausing on. Not every ancient culture embraced alcohol the same way. Some pushed back against it hard, and the reasons why are just as revealing as the reasons others embraced it. Certain hunter-gatherer societies studied by anthropologists show far less evidence of habitual alcohol use compared to early agricultural societies. Why would that be? One leading theory ties directly back to lifestyle. Hunter-gatherer survival depended on constant alertness, mobility, and split-second decision-making. A group that got intoxicated together in the wrong place at the wrong time faced brutal consequences. A predator attack, a fall from a cliff, a failure to notice an approaching storm. Agricultural societies, by contrast, had more stored surplus, more stationary settlements, and crucially, more consistent access to the raw ingredients fermentation requires: grain, fruit, and time. This suggests something fascinating. Humanity's relationship with alcohol may have shifted dramatically the moment we stopped moving constantly and started staying in one place. Settling down didn't just give us permanent homes and stored food. It gave us the stability required for alcohol to become a regular, repeated part of life instead of an occasional accident. Which means the invention of the modern lifestyle, stable homes, regular meals, stored surplus, may be directly tied to the moment alcohol transformed from rare accident into daily ritual. Ask yourself honestly, is your own relationship with alcohol shaped more by rare, special occasions, or by routine, stable access? If it's the second one, you're living inside a pattern that dates back roughly 10,000 years, to the exact moment humans traded constant movement for permanent settlement. Now let's push further into territory most people never hear about, because this is where the story gets genuinely disturbing. There's documented evidence from certain ancient burial and ritual sites suggesting alcohol wasn't just consumed voluntarily in every case. In some ceremonial contexts, particularly those tied to human sacrifice in specific ancient cultures, researchers have found evidence suggesting that alcohol, or other intoxicants, may have been administered to victims before ritual killing. Sit with that for a moment because it reframes everything you thought you understood about ancient alcohol use. In certain sacrificial contexts studied by archaeologists in South America and parts of the ancient world, chemical residue analysis on remains has suggested the presence of fermented substances in the systems of sacrificial victims shortly before death. Some researchers interpret this as an act of mercy, an attempt to dull fear and pain in the victim's final moments. Others interpret it more coldly as a method of control, a way to make a terrified human easier to manage in their final hours. Either interpretation is disturbing in its own way. Either alcohol was being used as the earliest recorded form of anesthesia for the condemned, or it was being used as a tool to suppress resistance in someone who had every reason to fight back. This is the darkest thread hiding underneath the cheerful, party-friendly history of alcohol that most content online chooses to tell. Long before bars, before breweries, before anything resembling modern drinking culture, alcohol may have already been entangled with some of the most brutal moments in human history, used not just to celebrate life but in specific documented cases to manage death. Ask yourself why this part of the story almost never makes it into popular retellings. Maybe because it's uncomfortable. Maybe because it complicates the fun narrative of ancient humans stumbling onto beer and throwing a party. But leaving it out doesn't make it less true. It just makes the full picture less complete. Here's the final escalation, the part of the story that should genuinely change how you think about something you may do every single week without a second thought. Everything you've learned so far, the accidental fermentation, the genetic mutations, the rituals, the labor systems, even the darker sacrificial evidence, points toward one inescapable conclusion. Alcohol isn't something humans invented. It's something that found us repeatedly across millions of years through fruit, honey, and grain, and slowly wove itself into nearly every layer of human survival, culture, power, and even death. That means the drink in your hand at a birthday party, a wedding, or a random Tuesday night isn't a modern convenience. It's the latest chapter in one of the oldest, most persistent relationships in human history. A relationship that helped some of your ancestors find calories in a hostile world, bonded strangers into cooperative groups, built the social trust that allowed civilizations to rise, funded the earliest large-scale labor systems, and in its darkest moments, dulled the fear of people facing death at the hands of their own communities. Here's the question worth sitting with long after this video ends. If the urge to drink is written into your biology by millions of years of evolutionary pressure, if your brain still runs on reward circuitry built for a world of scarce, rotting fruit, how much of your relationship with alcohol today is really a choice, and how much of it is an ancient survival mechanism, still running quietly in the background, in a world it was never designed for? Your ancestors didn't choose to crave alcohol. Evolution built that craving into them, one rotting piece of fruit at a time, across millions of years, long before anyone called it a drink. And that craving didn't disappear when humans learned to farm, build cities, or write laws. They just found new bottles to live in. The next time you raise a glass, you're not just having a drink. You're taking part in a chemical relationship older than language, older than fire, and possibly older than the human species itself. One that helped build civilization, and one that, in its darkest corners, was there at the very end of some ancient lives too. That's not a party fact. That's a 50-million-year-old thread, still running through your veins right now, whether you ever pick up a glass again or not.